a junior at MIT right now, and I'm majoring in computer science and in linguistics. And today I'll be speaking about two of my research projects, one of which is in the machine learning and healthcare field, and the other one, that one's still in progress, and it's in like language acquisition and NLP field. So, and then hopefully it won't like hopefully it'll be like around 20 to 30 minutes of presentation, and then there'll be like 15 minutes of Q&A time where you can feel free to ask me anything you want, whether that is about my research or generally college, anything you would want to talk about. Yeah. So, Darcy, shall I go ahead? Can I go ahead?
Yes,
Okay,
you may get started.
perfect. So, the first project that I'll be talking about is called From Data to Decisions, Learning Representations for End-to-End Sepsis Detection. So, objective. So, sepsis is a life-threatening complication of an infection. So, what basically happens during sepsis is that some other infection gives rise to infection from being in bed for a long time, or infection in the internal organs, or generic organ failure. And hence, it is more of a symptomatic thing than a disease in itself. However, it is very complicated, and fast detection of sepsis is critical in saving human lives. But clinicians today struggle with this task. So what we want to do is we want to design and develop a fast turnaround and a highly sensitive vision-based detection system for sepsis that will directly look at raw pixels of blood video and tell us if the patient has sepsis or not. So this is an overview and roadmap of how our project is progressing. So the first step that we do is model building. In this project, we use spatial and sequential models. So we have CNNs, RNNs, LSTMs, and GRUs, which are various neural networks. CNNs are convolutional neural networks, so they're good for detecting various features and images. RNNs and LSTMs and GRUs are also types of RNNs. They are recurrent neural networks, and what they are good for doing is remembering states in between different iterations of that network. So if you have a sort of model that you want to remember what happened like 5 seconds before or 10 minutes before, then a recurrent neural network is what you should be going for. We then annotate our images, which is just a fancy word for saying we sort of put some human markings on it to sort of help the machine in understanding. And then we have a chymograph representation, which I'll come to later. We then use we then use an integrated software pipeline that will iteratively take on new data, build a model out of it, and give us prediction on it. So after the model building, we have the actual learning part, which is we use a discrete class gradient-based optimization. So what this basically means is that we try to learn which is the best model and which are the best parameters for our model using various optimization techniques. And we do a sort of end-to-end decision learning. So instead of breaking down a process into multiple steps, we go directly from here is some blood video. And here is our answer as to whether this person has sepsis or does not have sepsis. We also do some hyperparameter optimization, which is basically changing the number of patients we're looking at, or changing the number of iterations of our model, and or changing however many images or fragments of images we're looking at once. And then we'll be evaluating on new patients and new samples. And lastly, we have the visualization part. So we want to not only tell whether a person has sepsis or not, but we also want to visualize whether what exactly are the features that our model is looking at and that this model is looking at. That helps us understand the what are the things that this model is picking up on that makes us feel that whether the person has sepsis or does not have sepsis. What this also helps us in doing is interpreting model decisions. So this is a very important part of machine learning in the healthcare field, is when we take decisions, when we ask doctors to take certain decisions or to trust our model, we also need to give them certain reasoning or interpretation of it. Which is where this visualization step is really important, because it tells us that what are the features that this model is looking at and what are the features that the clinical doctors are looking at, and do features between clinical doctors and the machines align. And maybe even our machine can find some new features that the doctors can then look at by human eyes and see whether they can also aid them as well. So a general pipeline of how a process might look like. So this is like an easier like version of what I said in the previous slide is that first we have some raw data. And to go from the raw data to the intermediate data, we do an annotation step. And then we go from the intermediate data to the actual training data, which is what we'll feed into the model. So, and then we have a script for that. And then from the training data, we actually create the model. So this is the training step, which is when we pass our data through the model in various batches and epochs. And and our model will we'll save like some parameters of that model at the end of the training stage, which will help us in getting our results, which is the evaluation stage. So once we have our model, we then evaluate it on new data or on the existing data, depending on whether we're doing like a validation set or a testing set or like just a part of the training set, whatever we're doing. And that is another evaluation script that we write. So most of my project is in Python. And yeah, so this is basically a pipeline of how data flows in between this entire system as a whole. And so when I told like talked about chymograph representations, I want to tell a bit more about this. So on the right, we have what we call as an assay. It's like a grid in which blood cells are flowing, and we have various images at different snaps of time from such assays. And we take vertical slices of this grid over time. So like we look at maybe this channel, and we look at how long it takes over time. And so like we'll look at this channel and we'll take pixels from this channel and then club it up over time, and that's called a chymograph. So what that helps me to do is to get input images, like to build my intermediate training data, and then I can sort of do a feature extraction with the neural network and then predict it. So yeah, so those are like the chymographs that would be represented. And this is a snapshot of how annotating images looks like. So here we can see that there are like two big grids. And then as you can see, like I have drawn these like little dashed lines in the grid cells. So this is what like tells us where the blood cells will be flowing. And once we can take like these different slices over time and squish them together, then we'll have data that will actually show us how the neutrophils or the blood cells are moving over time. So this is the training data that is built from the slide in the previous page over time. So we like take every splice and then we concatenate it over time. And then you can see that there are all of these like lines that are moving through, and those are basically neutrophils and red blood cells moving through the grid over time. So this is pretty interesting to look at. I was really excited when I got a full image for the first time. And this is basically what human doctors will be looking at as well when they are doing their diagnosis on patients. But of course, they don't have like our human eyes can't just like concatenate what happened in the last 5 minutes and bring up an image like that. Though when you do have an image like this, it makes it infinitely easier to identify what's going on. So this is, yeah, we don't need to go through this entire table, but this is sort of what results will look like for these models. As you can see, there are a bunch of models, and then we train them on various types of data. So sometimes we use all patients, and sometimes we use balanced patients. So that means basically taking some end healthy patients and then diseased patients, and then letting the model infer from both of them. And training for 40 epochs is like a good number of epochs to train for. And then we have sequences and batch sizes. And we see that we do achieve like like our best model right now achieves like around 72% accuracy, which is pretty good because the human clinician baseline is around 60%. And precision and recall scores, which is like how much of the patients who actually have sepsis did you tell have sepsis, and how much of the patients who are actually healthy do you tell they are healthy. And so the precision and recall scores are also like pretty good. So yeah, so this is the best model that I have so far. So this is what we call a confusion matrix. So the true label on the left is what the patient actually is, and the predicted level is what my machine tells me the patient is. So we can see that for like most of the healthy patients, the patient tells that they're indeed healthy, and for even more of the septic patients, the machine tells that they're indeed septic, which is pretty important for us because our goal is that we do identify the septic patients as fast as possible. So yeah, so that would help us. So this is like what a snapshot of the results looks like. So the training and the next results in the next steps is now I have the training and evaluation pipeline for all patients and models complete. So I have presented this at at a healthcare summit already, and then I'll also be presenting this next week at the NeurIPS conference. And we have 4 classes of patients: binary infection and binary organ failure. On the current models, you get around like a 72% accuracy on 2 classes. So I look at the patients who have both infection and organ failure, and then have neither. And in the future, I'm looking at implements like amplification augmentation. So basically, like thinking about how else can we look at the various, like we can really extract useful information from the raw data that we have, some part of regularization of slides, and then looking at more of the slices and so on. And on the right side, we have what is sort of like training loss and testing loss. As you can see, that this is like a pretty good loss results for a model, because we see that the loss is going down and then it sort of stabilizes. So we're stopping it at sort of a good point, and we're not like overfitting the model. So that is like good sanity check on that. Yeah. So yeah, so this is that's all I have for the first part that I was going to talk about. And so if anyone has like questions, I can take them now before we move on to a completely different field. Yeah. So if anyone has anything to ask about this project in general, I think now is a good time.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat, and I will be asking Shinjini about them. And so I have one question from the chat. Actually, a couple coming in now.
Okay.
Like, what was your educational path like? If that is, it's not quite relevant to like.
That's okay. No, I can take it. What was my what? Sorry, can you repeat it?
Educational path.
What was my educational path? If whoever wants to write this, like wants to clarify this, I'm only in my undergrad, so like I just like did high school and came to undergrad, and I guess I've always been interested in machine learning, healthcare in general, and I'm also a double major in linguistics, and I'm pretty much interested in NLP, language processing, and other linguistic studies in general. So I sort of came to college and decided that that's what I want to focus on. So that's why like I'm an undergrad, so I'm only my 3rd year, but I sort of like have some research experience from my first 2 years of college, mainly because I came in and sort of like knew that that was what I wanted to explore more. Yeah. But other than that, I don't know if there's a lot as to my educational path I can talk about, because yeah, I'm just an undergrad, and yeah, and also I'm not from the US, so my schooling is also not from the US. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I had a question about like if you could like explain more about the table that you showed. I think.
So do you mean this one?
Like the faint. I think it's more of like the graph that you showed.
The matrix?
Like when you were analyzing like the data, I guess. Of like yeah.
Just tell me which one you mean.
Let's see. I think. Oh, in the last slide.
The previous slide?
I think the slide after.
The slide after this? Okay, let's get there. Um, not this one.
Wait, let me. Oh yeah, this one. Like if you could explain it a bit more.
Oh, what part do you like want me to explain? Like the what the results or the future direction?
I think they were wondering about like the backgrounds of like the less like more transparent colors on the graph.
Oh, okay. So, okay, looking at the graph, so the the background is like old training epochs and then other models training epochs. So basically, this is how the training loss decreases over time over a number of epochs. So we have 2,000 like iterations of the model, and then when we start out with a pretty high training loss, and then we sort of go down, and then a good measure of like not overfitting is that the loss doesn't sway a lot as it does in the background. And then in the foreground we have like the blue line, which is like the training loss, and then a red line, which is the testing loss, and then an orange and a green line, which are the same losses of like other models, but these are like the best two models we have. And then so yeah, so it's basically comparison onto like exit unlike other models that we had, and why this is sort of a non-overfitting good place to stop our model training. Yeah.
Okay. I had another question, which was, what is raw data?
What is raw data? So in mostly in machine learning or data science, any data that you collect directly from the field is called raw data. And so in our case, it's blood assays. So they're like devices through which blood cells will flow over time. And doctors like come in and physically check on those assays. So we have images from them. And so that is what our raw data is in this case.
And then another question about, does the confusion matrix help identify false, like positive and negatives?
Yeah. So it tells us how much is our false positive, false negative rate. So this box right here is the true positive. This box right here is the true negative, and then this box right here is the false positive, because those are patients which are like which we. So this box right. So it depends on which you call positive, and like it depends on whether you call healthy as positive or like negative. But these two boxes here are the false positives and the false negatives. So that will basically tell us whether a patient who is actually healthy, we identify them as septic, or vice versa.
Okay, thank you. Um, what, why is it called like the confusion matrix?
So basically, I think it's a sort of historical reason, and don't quote me on this, but what I understand is that, I mean, it's a matrix in general, but it's called a confusion matrix because it sort of tells you how confused is our model in making these decisions. And then when like artificial intelligence first came into being, it was called soft computing. And then we had certain things called fuzzy models and fuzzy learning, which aren't really things that are so much the hype anymore. But this is a sort of historical term because we used to call fuzzy models as being confused on like things that they predict wrongly, basically. And so, in sort of historical reasons of that term, we still call like positive negative rate matrix a confusion matrix.
Okay. Thank you. I think those are all the questions for now. Um,
Okay,
you can continue.
okay, great. So we are going to take a um, we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna like not a time break but more like a mental shift, and gonna go over to a completely different field, which is what my other research project currently is in. So this is on the computational modeling of child phoneme acquisition. So as I mentioned, I'm also a linguistics major, so this is sort of a project that I'm starting my junior year as a sort of culmination of my existing work in of my existing like knowledge or skill set in both computer science and linguistics. So this might be a sort of capstone project for my college. Okay, so what is phonology? So phonology is basically how the is the abstract mental representation of speech sounds in people. It's a big area of linguistics. Like if we look at linguistic tires of knowledge, the first thing that we start with is phonology because like most languages except for sign languages have sounds, and hence speech is a big part of phonology, like of any language, most languages, and hence the study of speech is called phonology. So the idea behind phonology is that we have an underlying representation of a sound in our mind, And then that gives rise to a surface representation when we're writing it or when we're saying it. So phonology is concerned, so the study of phonology is concerned about what are these abstract units of representation and how are those units combined to form like newer and newer phonemes, new and then words and then sentences and so on. So this is one of sorry, someone did someone mean to ask something? Okay. So this is one of the examples of what I meant by underlying to surface representation. So the like on the right we have dog written in the phonological alphabet. It's called the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. And then that is what we mostly use for writing and transcribing phonological speech sounds because it gives us a unified measure to write speech sounds in like the various languages of the world. Okay, so that was like a quick introduction to what phonology is. And now I'm going to talk about phonological acquisition and the challenges. So if you think of a word, say bark, it doesn't always sound the same, and yet babies can pick it up. So for example, I can say something like bark or bark. So someone can shout, it can be a male person, a female person, someone can whisper it, and it would still know what word I'm saying, even though they don't sound exactly the same from time to time. So this is like a chart of vowels from child-directed speech. So child-directed speech is speech that is like mostly spoken to young children. And then F1 and F2, like the two axes, are like different what we call form and frequencies. So when you look at the speech sounds and you sort of analyze them, we have like harmonics, and then F1 is the first formant, F2 is the second formant, and you can see that like for example for like a certain like for like a certain sound. So this sound is like ha, and then this sound is pronounced in so many different ways when we plot like F1 versus F2. And then if we do the same thing for various other phonemes, so these are basically vowels written in the phonetic alphabet. We see that they're sort of like all overlapping and all over the place. And yet children can somehow make out from this mess that what exactly it is that we mean. So one of the biggest problems or like questions in today's like phonological acquisition or like language acquisition is that how do children exactly do this? Because like if we ask a machine to do this, if we ask like a general machine learning model to do this, it's gonna like job bound like strict boundaries. But as you can see, there's not a lot of like strict boundaries you can find in places like this. So how exactly do children do it? So, the hypothesis. There are two schools of thought in phonological features. One is that people tend to think that phonological features are innate and universal. That is, they're somehow hardwired to the human brain. Like babies are, or like human babies are born knowing that these sort of phonological features can exist. And then that is the Chomskyan school of thought. So, Noam Chomsky is a very famous linguist, and that's the Chomsky school of thought. And then a newer school of thought came up in the last few years, like not last few, it's more than 30 or 40 years now. It's the emergent school of thought, which is that phonological features are picked up. So like children sort of start out as a blank slate with no specific structure in their mind of how language is supposed to be, and then they eventually pick up on it. So the proposal that we're like trying to support using this project is that it is the emergent school of thought. So we believe that a learner sort of starts out with a blank slate, and then as and when they hear more and more phonemes and they recognize that the two phonemes are different in a certain way, it creates a division in the acoustic space. So we like have a formula that we like designed for acoustic knowledge updates, which is that if you're given a word frequency f, which is the number of times a word has been heard, and then an existing average signal of a word s, and then we have a new specific acoustic token, we simply update our frequency by one, and then use a sort of like weighted average rule for the new signal of the word. So, I mean, we don't need to go into the very specifics of that formula because it literally depends on what you want in your model. But the idea here is that we have a t, which is a threshold at which we consider that a word has been learned by the child, and we pick this threshold uniformly, randomly from 0 to 1. And then we have r, which is a measure of how familiar a child is to the word, which is like some sort of like sigmoid curve on that. So this is like the probability that that the child has learned the word as a function of how many times the child has like looked at the word. So yeah, they generally just the idea is that it's a sort of sigmoid curve that the beginning it takes a while for the child to sort of get to know the word, and then the probability or like the strength of the word memory gets higher, and then a few times later, and then like maybe after they've heard the word 30 or 40 times, they basically know the word at this point. So yeah, so continuing in phoneme acquisition, we see here another example. So on the top left, we see that the learner begins with no phonological contrast between the words. And then the learner has heard one instance of the word red and then one instance of the word blue that are like colored up here. And then eventually the learner hears the word blue a bunch of times. And remember when I said that they don't all sound the same? So in this plot, they're a bit like different areas. So this is also F1 versus F2. And then there's a third axis to this, which is VOT, or the voice onset time. So basically how long it takes for the onset. Onset is like the first part of a syllable to be uttered. And then eventually the learner hears the word blue many times and they realize that, oh, so anything in this little speck is literally the word blue. And so we believe that the learner sort of starts with a blank slate like this and no specific idea of where the divisions are supposed to be. And then eventually they learn more words and they create divisions in the acoustic space. So what is the experiment that we are doing? There is an existing experiment that I'm extending. So the existing experiment is by Dr. Alethea Coy. She was at UPenn. She's like my professor's student at this point. She just got her PhD this year, so I'm basically extending work on her PhD thesis. So her experiment is in using monosyllabic words words with a single syllable with syllable structures these. So like this is just V represents vowels and C represents consonants. So for example, the word like on is a VC word because like it has a vowel and then a consonant. So she's looking at simple words with only one syllable, no nasal segments, so like no M, N, like no words containing M, N, no positional variation from the Philadelphia, which is a specific child like speech corpus. And then our work is implementing this model because Alethea's work is mostly on, like she mostly has a theory of acquisition. And so what I'm trying to do is actually build the model to implement that. And then I'll be using some positional variation. I'll be testing in all of the Philadelphia neighborhood corpus, like not just like these specific ones. And then moving on to other corpora and then testing this theory in other languages. Because as you really know, like there's a ton of like languages around the world, and like proving something for English really doesn't prove anything in the grand scheme of languages. So I want to like extend it to other languages. So yeah, the testing methods we're using, this is a bit technical. We don't like need to go into all of this, but basically I'm using Prot, which is a phonologist software, you can say. Like most phonologists use Prot because it has a bunch of very helpful methods, and then Python scripts. So we look at segments of speech and we take like some measurements equidistantly in these segments. So this is just like various features. So you can call them like duration, CG, jitter, shimmer, HNR, which is the noise to signal to noise ratio, autocorrelation for like some consonants in the words, for some Farman frequencies for the sonorants. Sonorants are words which are just like pronounced louder. So like all vowels are sonorants, and then liquids like R, L, and then nasals, M and N are also considered sonorants. And then we also extract F naught, which is like the first Farman frequency for vowels. So it's sort of like you have a bunch of speech and you take like measurements of various features equidistantly in it, and then you extract like this specific like things for them, so to say. So results, conclusion, and future work. So far so this is still work in progress. Like I started this like a month or two ago. So far we see that the model does indeed converge and pretty fast actually and learns a reasonable number of categories. This is important because existing models sometimes say like, oh, you're a human, like, and then you know like 200,000 different categories, which is definitely not true. Like we definitely don't know like 2,000 categories for the word blue. We just know it as blue in our mind. So we need to sort of have a balance between being able to be specific enough that we can differentiate between different phonemes and different words and different sounds, but also not so specific that we end up with an unreasonable number of categories. And so why is this important? This is important because statistically significant results, like it basically needs to pass various statistical tests. Like we can't just see like one example and say like that's it sort of thing. But significant results would be like a huge step against the innateness theory. Like now that they're like I think at this point phonology is most it like a lot of stuff is mostly about which theory sort of fits the model of our mind better and how can we better use that theory to advance our other areas of knowledge. So if we can explain phonological acquisition better, we can better build like voice assistants and other natural language models and smart assistants and all of those like all of the Siri and Alexa and all of them better to sort of like pick up on how humans do it because clearly what we're doing now for machines isn't working and we want like a different approach or maybe a better approach or maybe a slightly different approach, and then any advancement in the linguistic and acquisition theory directly translates over to like huge accomplishments in terms of the NLP side or the more getting machines to understand human language side. So I think that is why this is like a pretty significant project that's a good bridge between theory and then understanding the computational side of it enough to transfer it over to like other sides of it. Yeah. So yeah. So that is like all I had to say on this project as well. And then now I'm gonna like open up to any questions you might have about either of my projects, about getting into college, college life in general, college life and online classes, or any question you can have. Like it's pretty much open. Like feel free to ask me about anything. It doesn't need to be about my projects. Yeah, and thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. There's definitely a lot of questions. So I'm going to start with like, how did you decide to like choose this topic for your research?
So basically in high school I did the International Linguistics Olympiad, and which is why when I knew that I'm interested in linguistics, and I've also like been pretty interested in computer science in general since when I was sophomore, junior in high school, I guess. Yeah. And then I did the Intel ISF, the Intel Science Fair. And then my first project there was also on language modeling. And then my second project at ISAF was on machine learning in healthcare. So I sort of had some bit of exposure to both of these fields. And I knew that I like this field and that I wanted to explore it more. I was just at college's time of exploring, and then so I sort of came into college. First semester, I got a research position with one of my linguistics professors, which is pretty exciting because I'm still working on that project. That's like my third research project. I haven't talked about it, but it's about understanding how humans acquire relative classes. So, and then especially for like third and fourth language learners. So we're trying to prove that no matter what age you are, you can learn a new language or third or fourth language, and you'll still sort of function the same way as like first language learners as babies do. So that sort of thing. And and then I knew I wanted to do something in relevant healthcare. So then I joined another project that I actually joined this my like lab. I'm doing the sepsis work, and I joined them in an autonomous vehicles driving position. But then they had the sepsis project come up, and they knew that I had some experience in machine learning in healthcare, and they asked me if I wanted to take it on. And so I think that was a big turning point because I was like, I'll definitely do it. And then I've been having a lot of fun with this project because I think it's pretty impactful, pretty promising. And then so that's the one I've been doing. And then for my third project, I sort of wanted to do something that brings in like both of my skill sets from both majors because I think it's a very like I think like both of my majors individually gave me very strong skills in computer science and linguistics, and I wanted to do something that brings the two of them together, and hence like this project was like basically conceived. Yeah.
There's another question. Is it possible to use phonology to communicate with animals?
Is it possible to use technology to communicate with animals? I have no idea. I know that people in cognitive science are working on this. Like this is one sort of the interesting things that comes with the trifecta of like linguistics, computer science, and cognitive science. And so this semester I took like two cognitive science classes, and I'm like, wow, it's this like third part that I never knew existed because I only saw like two parts of the thing. And then I'm pretty sure that there are people in cognitive science who are at least working on understanding animal sounds. So I know some parts from the linguistic side of things is that we know that animals do not understand language the way that humans do. So things like humans have like this concept of movement. So like I kept the book there, and then where did I keep the book? So you sort of like move certain words to the front. So like you take out the book and you move it to the front and you replace it with where. So that's called like movement or topicalization. So WH movement for like WH words. So these sort of things that are very, very specific to humans. And we have seen that like even our closest like closest ancestors like monkeys and primates cannot understand that sort of thing. So like a monkey can probably like monkeys can even sometimes like learn what is one and what is two and what is three, but they don't have a concept of sentence structure. So like humans can make like infinitely recursive sentences and can still understand even if we've never heard that sentence before. So sort of like I know that John told this to Mary, and then I know that John said that Sue did that. She said that she said them something to Mary. So even if we haven't ever heard something before, we can produce and we can understand infinitely complex sentences. So, which is something that I know has been sort of like shown in Cogsci that like our closest primates cannot do this. So they do not have a concept of language in the way that we understand it. But that being said, there is definitely research that's being done to understand animal sounds as we're communicating back with them. I don't know. I really just don't know the answer to this. But yeah, that's a good question.
Okay. And then there's another question. Would a phonological surface representation be like a letter representing a sound?
A letter representing a sound. Exactly. That is exactly it. So sometimes we have two letters that represent the same sound in English. For example, the sh sound, it's like one letter in the IPA because it's like one sound. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying. Um, and then for these projects, do you need to go to a lab or can you do it from home?
Luckily for most of my projects, I can all do them from home because all of mine are like very software or computer sciencey work. So I have not had like wet lab projects. Yeah.
Okay. And then I know there's a lot of questions relating to like high school and like college applications, I guess. So
Let me just stop sharing so that I can actually see people. Yeah.
no problem. Um, what activities like slash extracurricular did you do in high school, which like allowed you to, I guess, get into like MIT?
Okay, so that's a good question. And I should like put up the disclaimer again that I'm not from the US, and I know that like US admissions are pretty different from international admissions. And um I think most of my high school extracurricular activities involved the fact that I had been to the International Linguistics Olympiad representing my country thrice. So like 3 years in a row, 2016 through 2018. And then I actually continued on and I'm now a jury member at the Olympiad. And then I also did the Intel ICF Science Fair twice, so 2017 and 2018, and then I won both times. And I had a research paper in my junior year of high school from my first ICF project. And I think these are the things that like academically sort of set me apart. And then non-academically, I've been to like a bunch of things. Like I used to do some sports in school, and then a bunch of like student clubs, leadership positions. Um, I was a dancer and a painter back in school. And then, yeah, just like a bunch of activities standard. But academically, I think that's what set me apart. Yeah.
And another question was, in order to do this or like the first project in like the healthcare machine learning project, did you need to study medicine or take any medical related classes?
No, actually, for this project, I didn't need to take like any. I haven't taken anything except like intro bio. But then luckily, I've had mentors who do know this, and then we are working in collaboration with the Massachusetts General Hospital. So I have meetings with them weekly, and so they sort of brief me up on whatever the medical side of things there is to know. Yeah.
Um, and then another question was, did you do anything like related to computer science or machine learning in high school?
Yeah, so both of my ISF projects were in machine learning. And then I also had a paper from a conference paper from my first project. Yeah.
And then going back to your second research topic, why can the human tongue not pronounce some sounds correctly?
So a human tongue, a baby's tongue, can pronounce every single sound on the IPA chart correctly. Every single pronounceable sound can be pronounced correctly. As we learn a language, that's the idea that as we learn a language, we only create divisions between certain sounds, and we don't create divisions between certain other sounds. So there are certain sounds in my native language, for example, whose divisions do not exist in English. And when I speak those like two very similar sounds that are different to me, when I speak them to a monolingual English speaker, they sound the same to them. So that's basically what happens is a child's brain creates divisions as and when is required of them. And hence, if like two different sounds, um, so if two different sounds are like don't exist in a person's language, they sort of like forget to make a division between them because they don't need to. So that's why a baby can be born anywhere in the world and can pick up whatever sound distinctions are in their language. Yeah. And then I have like friends who speak Slavic languages. Like Polish has a bunch of S sounds, none of which I can speak. Like it sounds all the same to me, and my friends like, "Oh, you're speaking two different sounds, which just sounds the same to me." And then vice versa because my language just sounds like that English doesn't differentiate, but we do. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we covered most of the
Yeah.
topics.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great, like answering your questions, and then yeah, you can feel free to reach out to me. I guess I'll have my email or something if you ever want to talk about something. Yeah. Bye.
Great. Thank you so much. I think you are gonna do a quick. Okay, I'm gonna.
Hi, everyone. Please don't leave. We're going to be doing a quick 5-minute break before our next speaker, who is working in computational science and working in computation, Debbie Bard. So please stay, and we will begin our next session at 4:50.